In an article dated November 19th, 2014, the Intercept's Glenn Greenwald and Peter Maass wrote an article entitled Meet Alfred Bikowsky, the senior officer at the center of the CIA's torture scandals. NBC News called her a key apologist for the CIA's torture program. A follow-up New Yorker article dubbed her the unidentified queen of torture, and in part the model for the lead character in the film Zero Dark 30. Yet in both articles, she was anonymous. The person described by both NBC and the New Yorker is senior CIA officer Alfred Frances Bikowsky. Multiple news outlets have reported that as the result of a long string of significant errors and malfeasance, her competence and integrity are doubted, even by some within the agency. The Intercept is naming Bikowsky over CIA objections because of her key role in misleading Congress about the agency's use of torture and her active participation in the torture program, including playing a direct part in the torture of at least one innocent detainee. Moreover, Bikowsky has already been publicly identified by news organizations as the CIA officer responsible for many of these acts. The executive summary of the torture report released by the Senate last week provides abundant documentation that the CIA repeatedly and deliberately misled Congress about multiple aspects of its interrogation program. Yesterday, NBC News reported that one senior CIA officer in particular was responsible for many of those false claims, describing her as a top Al-Qaeda expert who remains in a senior position at the CIA. NBC, while withholding her identity, noted that the same unnamed officer also participated in enhanced interrogations of self-professed 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and witnessed the waterboarding of the terror suspect Abu Zubaydah and ordered the detention of a suspected terrorist who turned out to be an unconnected to Al-Qaeda, according to the report. The New Yorker's Jane Meyer, writing yesterday about the NBC article, added that the officer is still in a position of high authority over counterterrorism at the CIA. This officer, Meyer noted, is the same one who dropped the ball when the CIA was given information that might very well have prevented the 9/11 attacks. She gleefully participated in torture sessions afterwards. She misinterpreted intelligence in such a way that it sent the CIA on an absurd chase for an Al-Qaeda sleeper cell in Montana. Then she falsely told congressional overseers that the torture worked. Jane Meyer also wrote that the officer is the same woman identified in the Senate report who oversaw the months-long rendition and gruesome interrogation of another detainee whose detention was a case of mistaken identity. Both news outlets withheld the name of this CIA officer, even though her identity is widely known among journalists, and her name has been used by various media outlets in connection with her work at the CIA. Both articles cited requests by the CIA not to identify her, even though they provided details making her identity clear. In fact, earlier that year of 2014, the Washington Post identified Bikowsky by name, describing her as a CIA analyst who was tied to a critical intelligence sharing failure before the September 11, 2001 attacks and the botched 2003 rendition of an innocent German citizen thought to be an Al-Qaeda operative. That Post report led to both McClatchy and independent journalist Nancy Wheeler raising questions about the propriety of Bikowsky's former personal lawyer, Robert Litt, playing a key role in his current capacity as a top government lawyer in deciding which parts of the torture report should be released. The McClatchy article identified Bikowsky by name as the officer who played a central role in the bungled rendition of Khalid al-Masri. Al-Masri, who was revealed to be innocent, claimed to have been tortured by the agency. Al-Masri, a German citizen who was kidnapped from Macedonia and tortured by the CIA in Afghanistan, was released in 2003 after it was revealed he was not involved in al-Qaeda. Back in 2011, John Cook, the outgoing editor of The Intercept, wrote an article at Gawker based on the reporting of Ray Nolosilski and John Duffy, naming Bikowsky and pointing to extensive evidence showing that she has a long, if Swedenist, history of being associated with some of the agency's most disastrous boondoggles, including a key role in the CIA's pre-9/11 failure to notify the FBI that 2 known al-Qaeda operatives had entered the country. Earlier that year, the Associated Press reported that a hard-charging CIA analyst who had pushed the agency into one of the biggest diplomatic embarrassments of the U.S. war on terrorism, the rendering of torture of the innocent al-Masri, was repeatedly promoted, despite internal recommendations that she be punished. The Associated Press reported that she instead had risen to one of the premier jobs in the CIA's Counterterrorism Center. The article named her as Frances, explaining that the Associated Press agreed to the CIA's request to refer to her as Frances or by her middle name because her first is unusual. Bikowsky's name and a long string of controversial actions have become such an open secret that even she has her own lengthy, detailed Wikipedia page. The entry describes her as a career Central Intelligence Agency officer who has headed the Global Jihad Unit. In the months leading up to the release of the torture report, the CIA and the White House fought to prevent the Senate even from assigning pseudonyms to the CIA officers whose actions are chronicled in the report. The Senate ultimately capitulated, making it difficult to follow any coherent narrative about what these officers even did. As Jane Meyer wrote in yesterday's article, readers could speculate on how the pieces fit together and who the personalities behind the program are. But without even pseudonyms, it is exceedingly hard to connect the dots. Without names or even pseudonyms, it is also impossible to piece together the puzzle or hold anyone in the American government accountable. Evidently, that is exactly what the CIA was fighting for during its 8-month-long redaction process behind all these closed doors. Naming Bikowsky also allows people to piece together these puzzles and hold American officials accountable. The CIA's arguments for suppression of her name are vague and unpersuasive, alluding generally to the possibility that she could be the target of retaliation. The CIA's arguments focus on an undefined threat to her safety, claiming from Ryan Trappini, a CIA spokesman, told The Intercept, quote, "We would strongly object to attaching anyone's name given the current environment. These are crazy people in this world. We are trying to mitigate these threats," end quote. However, beyond Bikowsky, a number of CIA officials who oversaw and implemented the program have already been publicly identified. Indeed, many of these key architects of the program, such as Jose Rodriguez, are frequent guests on news programs. Trappani also argued that the Senate report is based upon only one side's perspective on the story, and that an article about Bikowsky doesn't require naming a person who's never had a chance to rebut what's been said about them. When The Intercept asked for the CIA's rebuttal or Bikowsky's to the critical portrayal of her in the Senate report, Trappani declined to offer one. He noted that CIA Director John Brennan had disputed the report's contention that the agency had misrepresented the value of the interrogation program.